This morning earlier, in a bit of high spirits. And of course, we can't read too much into that because he's got a tough act this afternoon in balancing the books. And so many are expecting different things out of it.
That's right, Dan. Definitely can't read too much into the high spirits that the minister showed earlier this morning. Here's what boggles the mind, Dan. So we've got all these issues with our state-owned entities and fiscal mismanagement that we've seen over the years. And the government wants to start up new projects. So you've got your national health insurance, the sovereign wealth fund, the state bank, and even a new power-producing entity. And I just want to talk about the feasibility of taking on these projects given our current standing. And Andrew's still with me there. Andrew, I've just spoken about all these new projects that government wants to take on, an important one being the Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Yeah, the question is exactly as you posed it, is where does the money come from? Is we know that there isn't an abundance of money at the moment. We know that the fiscus is absolutely stretched and tax collection is going to be very difficult. So the question is, how is this funded? So President Ramaphosa spoke about wanting to preserve the national endowment of the country, which would indicate there's probably a commodity-focused sovereign wealth fund, which is the prevalent model that one sees. But one has to ask the question, has that ship not sailed? Is our mining industry as an industry in its sunset as opposed to anything else? And the way that you would typically fund a wealth fund is through either royalties or through tax. Now we know that tax is constrained, so tax leakage is just not something that we could have at the moment. And at the same time, it would send a very mixed message to the investment community where President Ramaphosa has been looking to drive investment towards South Africa to say we're under pressure as a country, bring us your money and we're going to tax you even more to form this wealth fund. It's a conflicting message, so we'll be very interested to see the details as to how they propose to get this to work.
In an ideal situation, what sectors would the Sovereign Wealth Fund contribute to in terms of economic growth?
Well, the Sovereign Wealth Fund is really what you'd be doing is you'd be trapping revenue and tax and royalties out of specific sectors like mining, and then you diversify into other sectors. So that's the one model. The other model that they could follow is where this wealth fund basically takes strategic interests in a whole range of assets, and that's what you saw in Singapore, which was very successful. However, in most instances, that type of model hasn't worked, and the reason for it is political interference. For a model like that to work, is that fund needs to be run on a commercial basis with no political interference. So if one thinks about the business rescue practice at SAA that you're seeing at the moment, is government is being giving conflicting messages about they don't want to see root cuts, they don't want to see job cuts. So if you had a mechanism that was focused around that, it would need to be run commercially, and I'm not sure that the political unity exists at the moment to allow that to happen.
Yeah, and then the feasibility of what the President has spoken about, the State Bank, what the Minister of Energy spoke about at the mining in Daba of creating a power generating entity, and now, or as well as the national health insurance. You spoke about the fact that we don't have money, but another question would be, do we even need these entities?
Well, it's a big question. So when you look at the State Bank as an entity, is President Ramaphosa said that it's an injustice and it's unjust that people don't have access to long-term finance, basically. The question, though, would be, and what we saw from the failing of African Bank and recently of VBS, is if lending standards are lowered in order to allow consumers access to finance, there's significant risk. And National Treasury itself turned around and said that the long-term liability associated with the State Bank is something that we could ill afford, or which once again is a mixed message. So whether we need them or not is debatable. It's good to have these goals and have these discussions, but one wonders if now is the time to be focusing on these things. National health insurance being another, is if you had the health sector was in great shape and was a pillar of excellence towards which everything else could look and work towards, that would be one thing. But one can't say that the public health sector is in a great space. So to pour significant amounts of money into it on the basis of national health insurance, the implementation is going to be difficult. So it's a rational question to ask, is do we need these things?
Right. And then just to final thought from you, Andrew. The rand has been volatile over the last few weeks. Global markets, including the JSE, not doing too well. The investors among us are going to be listening very closely. What is the likelihood that we're going to see major reaction both from the rand and the JSE?
I think unless there's an absolutely shocking outcome today, I don't know if you'll see a significant reaction. I think global events, as we discussed earlier, the coronavirus and risk aversion to emerging markets are probably bigger issues in the short term. But in saying that, if we do have, like we had in the medium-term budget statement, an admission by government that things are far, far worse than we anticipated, you could see a negative reaction from the rand. But when one looks at like the bond market as an example, is a credit rating downgrade to junk status has already been priced in, and the rand probably to a certain extent is already reflecting that. The question will be what reforms and what medium-term initiatives and how credible are those initiatives, and that will determine the direction going forward. So the JSE, we think, would probably take its tone from what's going on globally, which is at the moment not pretty, and the rand similarly.
That's right. Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you so much for your commentary throughout the morning. Andrew Duvenage from NFB joining me to give a pre-analysis of the budget, Bradan. My colleague Devon Murugan will be coming up in the next hour with his commentator Daniel Silk, and they'll continue to look at the expectations, and of course we'll be giving you rolling coverage after the budget speech on the thoughts that come from the business community as well as government representatives.